Thank you all for joining today. We're going to give just a moment so everyone can join and won't leave anyone straggling. For those of you who are new to Zoom's platform, if you haven't joined us for prior Distributed Innovation for Net Zero webinars, thank you and welcome for joining. Let us know if you have any audio or video issues. You can submit a chat comment to the panelist here. We have a great panel for you today and hope that you'll enjoy it. Please feel free to ask questions throughout it in the Q&A section below, and we will definitely be addressing those at the end. And enjoy the show. Sussanna, I'll hand it over to you now to get started.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Sussanna Kass. Thank you all for joining us today at our NetZero webinar. And we have some very distinguished guests, and we have a lot of great content prepared for you today to talk a little bit about the NetZero Data Center today and in the future. I hope everybody is listening in safely and stay healthy during this challenging time. I specifically wanted to thank Daniel for joining us from Stockholm, Sweden today, who will be our first speaker, Nils, who's joining us from Boden in Sweden today, and also Alberto, who will be joining us from Switzerland in our presentation as our last speaker for the panel. I am a member of the Climate 50. I am known for my passion to drive climate change results in data centers and cloud. As a data center advisor to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals program, we all work very hard and like to work very closely with all of you that's calling in today to promote the alignment of the UN SDG goal with the data center providers with the head of states. 2020 has been actually an exciting start for numerous announcements made by hyperscaler, cloud provider, also the global 1,000 companies of their pledge to use renewable energy in an energy consumption of the data center and their commitment to reach carbon neutral. In the case of Microsoft, their leadership went that extra mile by extending its company carbon accounting to carbon negative for all energy consumed by data center and users. And their recent announcement also including the supply chain and since its founding. So all of these qualifiers make the goal extremely ambitious. So it's very exciting for all of us to be able to hear firsthand from Daniel today to tell us more about the sustainability journey that he and his colleagues at Microsoft are taking. And specifically, it is actually a treat for him to share with us some specific examples of how Daniel's leadership exemplified Microsoft's vision on sustainability of how they're able to accomplish 24/7 matching today. According to the Microsoft CEO, 2 decades of digital transformation happened in 2 months during the COVID-19. This is evidence for growth in the data center capacity planning that is just going to continue for this new normal. Many social media applications have shown exponential growth as a beneficiary from COVID-19 because the new normal that all of us are pretty well adjusted now is work from home or work from anywhere. And that will probably most likely continue for the rest of this decade, for the rest of the year, excuse me, hopefully not the decade. We'll find a vaccine prior to that. So the virtual meeting applications has become the new social media platform measured in billions of meeting minutes and more capacity to support this increase of 24/7. It is in a way a very exciting time for the connected everything era. So our first speaker, Daniel, has a very impressive background. He is the Microsoft Sweden Country Technology Officer. I have the privilege to meet him through one of the industry events, Data Center Dynamics, a few years ago, and we were both speakers. His leadership is astounding, and he makes specific impact to the long-term vision through innovation and society impact through technology on society and economic development. He is a member of the ISO International Expert Group for Cloud Standards, Vice Chairman of the Swedish Computer Society, He's also a teacher at the Royal Institute of Technology and served as the chairman for ISA Sweden. He's also the co-founder of 2 technology companies, and he holds numerous applications in his patents in Europe and the United States in applied cryptography. Daniel has a previous history as a brain researcher at the Karolinska Institute. He's also the developer and architect at the NASDAQ OMX Stock Exchange and a lead architect for one of the largest credit management systems in Europe. In addition, he's a distinguished member in the National Digitization Council, chaired by the Swedish Ministry of Digitization. So you can see Daniel is absolutely very busy and is also an innovator himself in terms of the digital transformation and sustainability. In addition to all of this, I actually found very interesting information that Daniel does have a few spare time. He's also a Swedish fiction writer with his latest novel, 11 Grams of Truth, about privacy and power in our modern society. So Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today. Very exciting for us to hear about some of the topics that you prepared. So we can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Sussanna, for this amazing introduction. Let's do like this. So, okay, so I have 20 minutes to basically pass on this subject. So I'm going to talk about Microsoft and basically our sustainability vision. And then I'm going to go into 2 examples that Microsoft have been working on for recently, really, attached to and also associated to data centers. So let's start. I think if we start from the beginning, basically, what we have been seeing for basically 70 years is that the world had an enormous economic growth. So you have seen a dramatic increase when it comes to GDP. And why is that? Of course, there's a lot of more people around, which also increases GDP, but that's not the whole truth. We have been so much more productive in many ways than we have been before. If you look at the same time, on the same time period on the energy usage, it is quite obvious that to increase GDP, it also means that you are going to use more energy. So there's a very strong correlation when it comes to energy and increase in productivity and increase in living standards as a whole. And if you also plot the carbon dioxide emissions during that period, it is also quite clear that there's a strong correlation between more energy use and more carbon dioxide emissions. So that's a fundamental truth of the energy systems and the energy sources that that we have been using for the last 50, 60 or 70 years. And if we look at the carbon dioxide emissions, it's also quite clear, obviously, that we are seeing that as the primary driver of a rising global temperature. And it is not for so long ago that we passed 400 parts per million in the atmosphere, which is kind of an unprecedented level. So that's a level we haven't been seeing for thousands and thousands of years. So we are living in conditions which are in many ways unusual for the atmosphere and the world to live in. So if you take that facts into consideration, I think the situation is quite clear. So the carbon dioxide that we emit today is not something that will be consumed by the atmosphere very easily. So it will be around for a long, long time. So if you look at the carbon dioxide that the Industrial Revolution emitted, when we had steam engines or the first factories, those carbon dioxide that they emitted, they are still around and they will be around for many hundreds of years still. So it's not like this is a passing thing. We are just filling a bottle which is more or less already full. But it's also true that we need to be more productive, and we need to increase the GDP if we want to increase the living standards. And obviously, most of the countries in the world has that as a target. It's a political target and an economical target. But we cannot continue to increase productivity and increase GDP while emitting carbon dioxide. That is the important fact. We really need to stop all carbon dioxide emissions. And if you look at the math that the Microsoft is supplying into the atmosphere, we are, I think you are, if you have been following how researchers is looking into this, there's basically 3 scopes of emissions that you categorize emissions into. So it's scope 1, that's basically the emissions that you do directly. If you look at it, for instance, like driving a car. And on scope 2, it's kind of the electricity that you are using. So the electricity by itself obviously generates emissions somewhere else, but you're not directly responsible. And the scope 3 is the more complex. It's the everything else. It's the buildings, it's the cement, it's also the energy that the products you produce, like the Xbox, for instance, for Microsoft, the energy that consumes. So it's normally a much bigger target, really. And as Sussanna mentioned in the beginning, Microsoft did a very big commitment in January this year. And what we said was that we will, by 2030, become carbon negative. So that's not carbon neutral. We say we are going to be carbon negative. And that means that we're going to remove more carbon than we emit in our different categorizations. So that means you also need new technologies. You need to act. You can't just be passive and reduce the carbon dioxide. You also have to be active in removing. So that means, for instance, things like planting more trees, but it will also involve other new technologies that has to be developed and has to be more mature. It could be things like direct air capture and other types of technologies that has to be developed to be able to do that on a global scale. And the second promise that we has committed ourselves to is by 2050, so if we go from 2030 to 2050, we will remove from the environment and the atmosphere all of the carbon that the company has emitted since it was founded in 1975. So it's quite a big challenges to do this, and it takes a lot of different projects. It takes a lot of different initiatives as well, and our data centers, as a very big energy consumption, is obviously a big part of that strategy as well. So what I will spend the last 10 minutes on is giving you 2 examples that we have been working on. One is a project which is called 24/7 Go, which we have been doing with a partner, a big energy company called Vattenfall. And the basic question is like this. So how do you know, as a consumer, that you get the type of energy that you pay for? So how do you know that the energy powering this computer that I'm using right now, how do I know where that energy comes from? It's difficult, obviously, to track single electrons. So how can I really tell that this energy is coming from a fossil-free or fossil power source? So the structure and the infrastructure that has been created for getting an answer to that question is something called guarantee of origins, or so-called GO certificates. So what's that? Well, it's digital certificates, and the one go is basically 1 megawatt hour of package proof that this has been produced from a renewable source. So if you're a wind farm, it could be you could package that energy, and that's something that you can basically only sell then once. You can't sell it many times, that package. So you can buy as a consumer evidence basically that you have bought 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy. So that sounds good. But there are problems with the current infrastructure, current GO certificates as well. One of the big problems is that you get basically yearly reports on these GO certificates. So that means that after 1 year, you can get the answer to basically that question: where did my energy come from? So it's very slow possibilities to react on what's happening, or what kind of strategy you have for yourself when it comes to sustainability. And you may not get 100% renewable energy at every point in time. Even if you buy renewable energy, you're not necessarily buying the consumption of that. You are really buying the production of the renewable energy. So it doesn't necessarily you that's going to consume that production. So you lack visibility on your own climate impact, really. And if you don't have any visibility and you don't have any information, it's very difficult to act if you don't have that information. So what could you do? Well, maybe you could change your supplier, but also if you're a very big energy consumer, you could possibly also adapt your consumption, because the reason why you might at certain times have a lot of fossil energy in the grid could be that it could be the weather, it could be that it's much harder to get, of course, solar power during nights, etc. There's a lot of factors that you could take into consideration about your own power consumption, really, to help produce fossil-free energy. So what is the solution that we have developed 24/7? Well, it basically is smart meters. It's measuring energy in the energy grid. It's based on the Microsoft Azure Internet of Things platform together with Vattenfall, which has been the developers here. We match the consumption and we match the production, not on a yearly basis, but on an hourly basis instead. So that means you as a consumer get knowledge, and knowledge, if you have knowledge and you know what's happening, it also gives you responsibility to act on that. And it also makes it possible to act. So it's really creating a lot of new kind of transparency when it comes to how energy is produced in the energy system. And this is basically how it looks like. So this is an example of the Power BI report, where you can see, this is, for instance, the Microsoft Office in Stockholm. You can see how much of that energy comes from hydro, from wind, and the total consumption, etc., and how that it fluctuates during a certain time of period. So the solution is now piloting basically 2 offices. So the house here with the green roof is the Microsoft office in Stockholm. So we have built that system into that building. So at that building, we can then see the power mix. And there's going to be more announcements in not so long periods of time on this. The example number 2, which I would like to bring up when it comes to data centers and sustainability, is something called the sustainability calculator. So the sustainability calculator, what's that? Well, for many years I've gotten the question, wouldn't it be great if I could see the carbon footprints that I have on my apps? Or what my apps is really generating? Because if you are a company that want to get the full 360 view of how much carbon dioxide do I really emit, you also have to include the IT systems and the energy that those IT systems is generating, and how much carbon dioxide that's created from those types of apps. I think one relevant question would be, is this really important? Is this big enough to have as a focus? We always need to focus on the big things that we can do very quickly to reduce the maximum amount of carbon dioxide. And is it worth the focus? And there is I don't know if you remember, but there was a report a couple of years ago was basically looking into the energy of streaming the song Despacito, how much energy that actually consumed streaming that over the internet. And it consumed as much energy as 5 African companies put together in a single year. So I remember that report was quite challenged, to be honest. I'm not really sure if it's true, but it is true that it generates a lot of energy. So it is really relevant to have that as a important part of your own company reporting. And Microsoft Sustainability Calculator does exactly that. So what is it? It's basically an app that you can install in the Microsoft Power BI infrastructure. So if you have a Power BI account, you could install this sustainability calculator in that account, and then you could connect it to the Microsoft Azure platform. So you give it the subscription ID, etc., and it goes into those resources that you have to do a calculation. And the calculation looks basically like this. So let's see if I could give you some more detail of what you actually are seeing. So what you do is that you compare the workloads that is running in Azure, compare it with some type of other data center that you could have used instead. So if you compare it to a data center, an on-premise infrastructure, which have a low efficiency, for instance, in this case, you get this result. So if you would run these applications on an on-premise with a low efficiency power, you would get basically 478 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And the infrastructure at the Azure platform basically means that you can save through efficiencies 380 metric tons, and you can also save 72 metric tons from renewable energy purchases. So that means that basically you get 26 metric ton emission on that workload that you have been pointing this report on. And you can then see you got the 95% reduction. This is how much metric ton you save, and you get equivalence. You also get basically a categorization on where that energy comes from. Is this for storage, is this for compute, etc. So I think this is a very interesting reporting tool that gives also visibility to consumers on the platform to see, could I possibly do a design change? Could I do something else? Could I deploy it differently to save energy? And by that saving carbon dioxide as well. So it gives a new tool that's more focused on sustainability, not necessarily only on performance or on cost. So if you're interested, so basically that was our 2 examples, and I'm happy to answer questions a little bit later. But if you are interested, you could definitely go in and look at our site where you can follow a lot of new products that's continuously going to come in as we travel into 2030 and our commitments for that. So thank you. And by that, I'm going to give the word back to you, Anna.
Thank you, Daniel, for your presentation. It is absolutely inspiring that Microsoft has exemplified being a provider for cloud computing, but at the same time is a pioneer in sustainability. So yes, definitely we'll come back when the audience have more questions, which I think they're coming in. Let me share with the audience an illustration that I put together recently in a white paper that I prepared for data center dynamics. When they basically asked me to lead some innovation relating to data center. So in my 30 years working in the data center industry, I thought it would be a good thing for me to start with the fundamentals, which is layering out the different phases of a life cycle, starting with design, site selection, where we're going to put our data center, how we're actually going to build and operate and maintain the data center 24/7, 365. And more importantly, for a few of us who actually have been working in a hyperscale growth company, myself, such as in eBay, or running as a COO and running Hewlett Packard, Asia Pacific Data Center, and Sun Microsystem in terms of all the global data center operation, very high per growth. And oftentimes we're focusing more on the growth part of the scalability, but sometimes we also need to also think about scaling from a disassembly perspective, as we do more consolidation, such as the impact of a paradigm shift of cloud computing. In reflection, I have to admit that most of us in the data center industry in the last 2 or 3 decades have been thinking linear. And most still today are not familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goal. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I highly encourage you to go to the website on UN and get educated on how you can get involved. The UN SDG 17 goal, sometimes is known to be the global goal, seek to lay the foundation and a groundwork for corporation, organization, and individuals alike to build a better world, especially in challenging times like we're all experiencing today. The SDG goal was launched in 2015 by the United Nations. They are immediately adopted by all United Nations member states as a core of the 2030 agenda. Whether you're now building a data center or a developer or a cloud provider or a nonprofit, could be an educational institution, an entrepreneur, or more importantly, as an individual, you can all take action and volunteer and align yourself to these global goals. The SDG goals are inviting as a call to action by all countries to promote prosperity while protecting the environment. And my call to action today, by putting together this webinar and joining with the guests, my thoughts would be, if we are to succeed in the data center industry going forward in a connected everything era, we must rethink. We must deliberately depart from the linear practice that we all do today, a status quo, and transition to circular thinking. We need to start thinking, building data center as a net zero design, and measure our progress as illustrated by Daniel earlier through the transparency, and not basically do the offset of clean energy at the end of the year, but measure it per kilowatt hour consumed on an hour by hour basis. That is absolutely inspiring. And we must also think about data center has its own life cycle in terms of cost, in terms of impact assessment. So in this regard, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Nils, from Boden, Sweden today, where he resides with his family. Nils is a director for Boden Business Agency, and BBA is a business developer for the municipality-owned organization. Prior to Nils joining BBA, he has worked extensively in the IT sector, and he also have traveled extensively, and all with the same purpose about helping companies to decarbonize many data center or energy intensive projects. So he has many success that he brought to him when he joined BBA. On a normal day, Nils will probably be traveling again in the Nordics region, or oftentimes come to the USA, and helping us to really genuinely understand the value that his organization can provide. And today I am very, very excited to have Nils to share with us the entire community that he lives in, that they have embraced circular economy in many different ways. And also he has some very good news for some of you who are paying attention about a NetZero Data Center, because he has many locations that is ready to build, what I call shovel ready zone sites. for these energy intensive industries such as net zero. And in the times like the COVID-19, we are all capacity hungry. We are all actively looking for sites that we can actually deploy capacity. Well, I certainly know I have more than a dozen projects that we can actively work on. So without further ado, Nils, can you please take over, and thank you again for spending your evening with us.
Thank you very much, Sussanna. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you sound great.
Good, thank you. Let me see if I can get my PowerPoint shared here. So first of all, Sussanna, thank you for inviting me to this NetZero Data Center webinar. I generally think this is an important topic, not only for us locally, but also on a national and global level. So I'm very happy to share how we can contribute to the decarbonization of the industry. As you mentioned, Sussanna, my name is Nils Lindh, and I work as a business developer for a municipality-owned organization called Boden Business Agency. And I would say one of our main tasks is to develop large, ready-to-build and zoned sites for energy-intensive industries. That include all the necessary infrastructure. And the input for our site development are driven by all the requirements of the locally committed UN SDG goals, but also to meet the NetZero Data Center lifecycle design requirements, as mentioned earlier by you, Sussanna. And I think Alberto, you will explain it a bit more in detail later. Okay, so just to get your bearings where I'm calling from, I'm in a town in northern Sweden called Boden. It is located just by the Arctic Circle, and it has about 30,000 inhabitants. Some data center investments I would like to mention in this region are Facebook. There are 3 hyperscale data centers. There's Hydro 66, an ultra-efficient colo data center. The award-winning Boden Type data center, funded by the EU Horizon 2020 program. And of course, RISE Research Institute in Sweden, their research data center that is located in the region as well. We do, of course, welcome hyperscalers, so it would be also great to work with Microsoft on NetZero data center development in this region. By the way, Daniel, great presentation. I look forward to seeing the result from your collaboration with Vattenfall there. Anyway, as you can imagine, it's very cold during winters and mild during the summertime, which means the climate is ideal for fresh air cooling, and that helps the energy efficiency metrics. Even you, Sussanna, have been here in Boden, so you know how cold it can get, but to be honest, you were more impressed about the grid resilience, which is good. Let me see here if change the screen. Hang on. There we go. Okay, so hopefully now you see a map of northern Sweden. Northern Sweden is the source of hydro-generated power at low cost. And the idea is to use some of it in the region rather than transmitting it away. In essence, using the power locally gives us an opportunity to create jobs that don't exist today, which is why the NetZero data center lifecycle thinking is to our advantage. Also important to point out is the 100 years of power infrastructure development to support critical infrastructure operations such as the mining and the pulp production, and now the digital infrastructure such as the data centers. In other words, the resilience has during these years been built into the grid infrastructure. Okay, next page. For us at Boden Business Agency, being able to develop ready-to-build sites with renewable power sources is not enough to decarbonize the industry. We want data centers to be in the center of a circular energy system. We are working in one way in the energy sector, so our transition to a circular economy is already underway. We have initiated a large project together with the Swedish Energy Agency and agreed to become a strategic node for a resource-efficient circular energy system between the IT sector and the food cluster, as you can see on this slide. So the project idea is to use existing energy sources and connecting them together, creating circular energy flows in the forms of gas, water, and electricity, but also to create new business models and business opportunities from this. And one example to illustrate this in our ecosystem, and which is about to kick off in a few weeks, is a circular energy flow of waste heat from the data center. So electricity flowing through the service generates waste heat that will be used for food production. The food waste from that production will be used for the biogas production, and the biogas production can be used for hydrogen production. And the hydrogen, in its case, will be used to transport food to the market. But also, from the biogas plant, we can apply carbon capture, which the greenhouses need. And the greenhouses produces oxygen, which the fish farms need, and so forth and so forth. Also, to control and monetize these flows, we have an idea to implement an energy-related blockchain to support the new business models. So this energy system is very important for the national government and hence the involvement and funding from the Swedish Energy Agency. The purpose of creating this energy system, or parts of it, is that it could be replicable for other locations with similar infrastructure where data centers are located. And I really hope this makes sense. We are willing to explore opportunities in Boden when it comes to net zero innovations. We have the whole community behind us. So please do not hesitate to contact me if you want to get involved. And thank you again, Sussanna, for letting me share with you our view on net zero data center site development.
Thank you, Nils. How I wish I'm actually with you in Boden. I do remember the time that we spent together, and you and your colleague were kind enough to showed Alberto and I around, and a couple of our guests from the data center industry, and we're definitely very excited. And since then, I think we started some businesses with you guys, and it's been just wonderful.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot of opportunity.
Right. Just to prove me or keep me honest, I guess that probably would be a wonderful way to say for those of you in the audience, if you are in the data center industry, Neil and her colleagues were very clever. And before I get back on the plane to leave Boden, to go back to Stockholm and then fly back to San Francisco, they were able to actually prove to me that they can actually get a permit from the time I landed in Boden to the time that before I left, that can be zoned for a new data center bill. So I was extremely impressed, because that would never happen in the USA. Within a week, I will be able to kind of get a permit for a new data center. So this is just wonderful for you to be able to demonstrate how your entire community are really embracing the data center. So time to market is extremely important. And indeed, I hope the audience enjoy what I was able to experience personally myself in terms of how circular economy is not just a concept. Listening from our two speakers earlier, Daniel and Neil, you can clearly see the transparency, the theory to practice. And both of the example I found that exemplify the UN SDG goal and clearly also demonstrate what I call the material circularity, which is something that I'm actually working on in terms of a material passport So we can identify the resources that we are extracting from the environment, track them through the process that is actually being converted in production into materials, what is actually being consumed, and at the same time, how it's actually going to be kept in perpetual life through a circular waste management technique. So this is extremely wonderful, and I continue to learn from both of you and your organization. So now let's move on to the third speaker. Our first speaker is Alberto. He needs no introduction. For those of you who actually live in Europe, he is a veteran in the clean energy sector for the last 2 decades and is calling in from Switzerland today. First of all, I thank you all gentlemen for sharing part of your early evening with us. Alberto has led numerous clean energy design projects successfully, and as a managing director and architect for the last 20+ years. He is an industry expert in clean energy. He is the authority that many of us actually aspire to live up to in terms of his ingenious design. So he founded another new startup called InfraPrime beginning of this year. It was joyful that he welcomed me to join him. So we've been actually working together. So I felt that it would be really important for him to talk to you all directly today about sharing some of his latest accomplishment with the European Union and other data center clients in terms of doing a carbon-free energy design. Perhaps he will start by talking to us about some of the work he's done in Boden and Sweden and in the Nordics. And then I think his design will also work around the world for many of the clients. So Alberto's background is extremely impressive. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's extremely innovative, a wonderful person to working with on a daily basis. And he is just as passionate as I am regarding the NetZero Data Center design. Together, we have been working on multiple projects that actually help to scale the data center to meet their carbon neutral and their carbon negative goal in the case of Microsoft. So he'll give an illustration of some of the work that he's done with Microsoft in the headquarters, Seattle and Washington. Alberto leads investment plan and institutional relations with the European Union. Even though he's based in Switzerland, he's extremely agnostic to any technology or any country. So he would love to work with anyone that actually are interested in deploying clean energy for edge, cloud, and colo data center. He also has significant stake in his work in the fuel cell area, being a founder and CEO of a company called Solid Power before he founded InfraPrime. And Solid Power and other fuel cell provider is basically second nature to Alberto, who has commercialized many fuel cell generator in both residential, small businesses, and also data center client, including Daniel's company at Microsoft. So Alberto, let's chat a little bit about sustainability cost of ownership, maybe using an illustration of InfraPrime carbon-free design. In the beginning of the year, like I mentioned, that many esteemed hyperscalers such as Microsoft and others, including Google and Amazon, have stated their ambition to establish their clean energy or the carbon negative goal. Actually, no, I think Microsoft is the only one that basically stated the carbon negative goal. I think the rest of them are still carbon neutral of their own consumption. So Microsoft is the one that went that extra mile. So, but in addition to the hyperscaler and the cloud provider, I personally have gotten in contact with over 150 colocation providers who also have pledged carbon neutral. So thanks to you, Microsoft and Daniel, for your company. I think ambition do leads a lot of people who can follow. And also 200 global 1,000 companies I'm actually also working with that they need to put their load somewhere. And they very much like to actually explore the Nordics. So I think this will be wonderful that we actually have this session. So stay tuned. We will probably do a deep dive next week. In addition to that, for the company that Ferris used to work for, who actually thank you for helping us set up this webinar today, Apple, also make a splash on not just on data center consumption, but also the entire supply chain, which Daniel mentioned a little bit earlier regarding the term scope 3. So the data center is definitely demanding in scope 2 in terms of the consumption of the energy, but I also felt it's actually very important to also look at from the material perspective. So for some of you who do not know, 1 megawatt of a data center for 1 year in the dirty area, such as Ashburn, is equal to 7,788,000 pounds of carbon equivalency. This is bad. So we need to basically do what Daniel and Nils were educating us earlier, because if we continue the way that we basically do to think linear, to take resources and emit waste into the air, this is really, really bad for our for climate change, and at the same time for the generation to come that will also be using the resources that we are currently enjoying. And so this indeed actually is a call to action for urgency. So let's go to the next slide, Alberto, and start thinking about how does your design will be able to actually help us solve this problem. So Alberto, how does a carbon-free energy design that you lead in InfraPrime will be able to address the traditional total cost of ownership, such as reduction in capital expenditure?
Okay, but first of all, thank you, Sussanna, for your incredibly kind introduction. Yeah, I'm very happy to address this point. To reduce cost, especially CapEx, and extending it to OpEx too, we follow basically 3 approaches. The first one is, of course, increasing efficiency. We always select very efficient technologies, generation technologies, storage technology. We always look to have the most efficient technologies available on the market, also new technologies. That, of course, reduces fuel costs, reduces waste too. The second, and that has a major impact on CapEx, is simplifying the design. The best way to reduce the cost of something is not to build it in the first place. And by the way, that has also an additional positive impact on removing points of failure, increasing therefore uptime and availability. That has the biggest impact on CapEx, that's simplifying design and removing components. And the third one is the standardization, increasing the volume of products used and having a solid and diverse supply chain. That is our goal in setting the standards for this new carbon-free energy.
Thank you, Alberto. By the way, you're very welcome. I wasn't kind introduction. I was just actually stating the facts of your background. The second point is the following. For the carbon-free energy design, if it reduced the capital expenditure, I think this would be great. But oftentimes the majority of our expenses, because we operate 24/7, 365, is really relating to operation expenses. I mean, being a COO for eBay International, I live by our Bible, which is the standard operating procedure, right? The SOP. So can you talk to us a little bit about how the carbon-free energy will address the operational expense that each data center has to manage, especially when you also have to put some load in a third-party space, such as the colocation provider?
Yes, the operational expenses, one of the major ones is power, and then there are all the service and maintenance costs. And as I said, the simplification of the design, removing every component that we can remove, and sourcing renewable energy there where it is available, abundant, and at low cost, such in location like Boden. So you have always these 2 approaches. If you are free to select your location, select the really prime location, sustainable locations, which put together low cost of renewable abundant energy and an environment, an infrastructure which is sustainable itself. And the second is what we call sustain tech. If that is not possible, then you reduce the cost by design, by simplifying and eliminating. If you remove a component, or if you remove a backup diesel generator, for example, you don't remove only the capital cost, you remove also the service cost and all the emissions, and even the material used to manufacture it. So it's a multiple gain for the environment.
Very well. Let's talk a little bit about the fuel. For everything that basically I think Daniel and you talked about, especially Neil talked about from the Bowdoin perspective, right? The backdrop of actually Bowdoin is the hydroelectric power, which is basically the fuel compared to where I live in the Bay Area, served by my utility, is definitely a dirty fuel from a coal fossil fuel premise perspective. And it's wonderful to actually have the calculator that Daniel shared earlier in terms of how Microsoft is now providing not just for themselves, but transparency to the Azure client and the cloud platform, that it is wonderful that when I'm actually using the Teams that I will be, or any other application or playing the Xbox or whatnot, that I will be able to know about my own carbon consumption. So can you talk a little bit about how your carbon-free energy design will be able to provide transparency from the fuel perspective?
Yeah, from the fuel, we make designs that give multiple choices. As I will show later on, when you are in a location, we mentioned Ashburn, where the grid delivers fuel, power, which is carbon loaded. We give the possibility to use alternative fuels, which are renewable, such as renewable gas, which is becoming increasingly available, and also the cost, like with every other renewable technology, are falling very sharply. So by giving these multiple options, it has the impact, not only the positive impact, not only to reduce the cost of renewable options, but also to give the duality, the power duality, which is needed for achieving 99.999 uptime and availability. If you power a data center with a renewable gas and a grid at the same time, you can switch between the two, and you can perform your full transition from the dirty grid to the clean gas at the pace that your business allows.
That's exactly what some of the agility we need. So for the remaining of the time, Alberto, which we have about 8 minutes remaining, can you walk us through some technical design that you have prepared for the audience today? And then we'll do a quick Q&A and we'll do a wrap, okay? So go ahead, Alberto, please take this forward for your work.
Thank you, Sussanna. I will start with going into a little bit the details of what has been shown also before. So the premises of sustainable data center compared to the typical status quo data center. A conventional data center is designed around cheap extraction, linear use of resources. It uses and then it discards the resources back to the environment in form of waste, such as heat or electronic waste. Very often, waste in landfills is also harmful to the environment. So the long-term results of this status quo are mass consumption of natural resources, idleness as a standby capacity, an intense carbon footprint, and the harmful emission generated by the mass consumption of fossil fuels. And currently, the majority of the data centers worldwide are still built like status quo data center. On the right side, we see the next generation, which of the data center which have the sustainability at its core. It uses renewable energy 24/7. It achieves net zero result in carbon footprint, emissions, and waste. And it does this while maintaining 99.999% uptime, achieving optimal resource usage effectiveness, power, water, land, network. And we measure this by our PUE, of course, which has to be very close to 1.0. And for example, a water usage effectiveness, which we want to drive it down to 0 actually. So sustainable data center use renewable and carbon-free energy sources, reuse materials to perpetuate life cycles, remanufacture byproducts, and reduce landfill impact. So overall, the sustainable data center benefits the environment, the society, and human welfare 24/7 in alignment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Okay. carbon-free energy, that's the focus of our design, is at the core of a net zero data center. And the requirements are the same for the non-carbon-free energy. It is resilience. Yeah, for a data center, resilience and 24/7 uptime are the core principle of its existence. A data center must be operated, as I said, at 99.999% uptime availability. Status quo data center includes diesel backup generators to prevent the data center from failing when the grid becomes faulty. But diesel backup generator have no place in a CFE design data center. Okay.
Alberto, I'm going to do a quick
Go on.
time reminder. We have about 3 or 4 minutes left. So
absolutely. So your
technical design.
Perfect. I will show two designs. The first one is to clean up dirty cloud in location where the grid cannot deliver sufficient carbon-free energy. And the second will cover the removal of diesel backup generator. Let's start with the first. So what you see here on the left is IPM module, a 2 megawatt module design with a PUE of 1.1 to 1.2 max, and fuel cells to generate carbon-free energy on-prem. The renewable gas is the source of the 24/7 renewable and controllable prime power, which is generated by the fuel cell. Resiliency here is designed in at the module level with a dual independent power input, you can see, and also the site level, as the two connections, the gas grid and the power grid, are completely independent. The fuel cell's power density in terms of kilowatt per square foot or per square meter is sufficiently high, and therefore their footprint is sufficiently low to cover the entire power and energy needs of a data center. Other renewable sources like solar PV and wind have a lower power density, and usually you cannot physically fit them on-prem. And in this case, the grid represents the backup, and no backup generators are required. Okay, you can deploy this design at the site level or the pod level on the left side, or you can bring it down to the rack level, as shown on the right. So Microsoft has pioneered the rack level fuel cell power generation in the Advanced Energy Lab in Seattle. And I'm very proud about having delivered the fuel cells for that proof of concept. So this new design brings additional simplifications, as I was mentioning before, in terms of removing the cost, the inefficiencies, and the waste of the power distribution to the racks. I go quickly to the second example, because given the recent Microsoft announcement to eliminate the dependency from diesel fuel by 2030, this design is to fit that purpose. And while diesel fuel accounts for less than 1% of the data center overall emissions, eliminating unused assets avoid against material waste, and it improves the sustainable cost of ownership. And to give an idea of the size of this, only in California, a total of about 650 megawatts of diesel backup has been submitted for approval to the Energy Commission. So here we focus on eliminating diesel backup generator. The grid is the primary source of energy. We deliver it with a 24/7 hourly matching contract. The on-site storage alleviate the intermittency of renewable energy. Okay? Diesel backup generators are replaced by batteries or by hydrogen fuel cells. So one very frequent question is, when do you use batteries and when do you switch to hydrogen? It mainly depends on the required duration of the backup. In general terms, battery storage is the preferred solution up to more or less 4 hours. Beyond that time, adding additional backup hours means you have to add additional batteries. On the other hand, hydrogen fuel cells are initially more expensive on a per kilowatt base for short duration. But for every additional hour, all what you need to add is only the fuel, hydrogen, not the full system. And this gives an advantage to hydrogen fuel cells for backup duration, let's say, in excess of 4 hours, more or less. So I'd like to conclude, if we are, I think, good on time, saying that every site can have its optimal net zero design solution with zero carbon, zero emission, and zero waste. And I give it back to you, Sussanna.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you very much. And I cannot be saying that this is more timely. I turned my video on for some of you who can actually see a little bit outside my window. Clean air is, this cannot be more opportune time. With the wildfire going on right now in Silicon Valley, which unfortunately broke out the last 24 and 48 hours in Silicon Valley, we cannot see any blue sky for a while with that extreme heat. So I cannot be more compassionate right now about talking that we need to take action and listen to what Daniel educated us today, what Neil shared with us in terms of this beautiful environment that he lives out there, and what Alberto actually were able to do to deliver a triple bottom line from a sustainability cost of ownership using the NetZero design. So I want to thank the audience for joining us today, and definitely give applaud to all the speakers. So thank you for joining us today. I want to take 10 seconds for the next slide to give a shout out for next week's webinar. So Alberto, can you go to the next slide, please? So what we have prepared for you is actually do a deep dive in InfraPrime to show you in real study about what does that mean and what we have learned in terms of our own personal experience about deploying, designing, and continue to be expanding NetZero data centers, specifically actually up in the Nordics. So joining us, we'll have a leader from Hydro 66 and Lane Patterson, who needs no introduction. Lane was the CTO at Equinix and also at Yahoo. And he is actually also helping to working on Arctic Connect and a couple other very innovative connectivity up to the Nordics from the US and also in Europe. And Alberto, you also will be joining us, of course, in terms of talking about the details. So for some of you who enjoyed today's webinar, please give a shout out to thank you, Daniel and Nils and Alberto for joining us, and hope that you can join us again for next Wednesday. And that will then conclude our August webinar. So stay safe, everyone. I thank you all for joining, and bye-bye now. Take care.